Welcome to Washington in Focus. I'm your host, TJ Martinell, and here with me is Carleen Johnson, and we're going to be discussing a parental rights law that some feel is under attack by the state legislature after they passed it last year. Carleen, tell me a little bit about what the situation is in the legislature right now.
Yeah, this still seems to be the dominant controversial measure of this session. I can tell you that. And I attended on Thursday late morning another hearing on second substitute House Bill 1296 to essentially remove many of the parental rights that were guaranteed by Initiative 2081. Now, folks may or may not recall, but this was an initiative that was filed by Let's Go Washington, signed by more than, I think, 440,000 Washingtonians, basically to say, okay, schools, you're not going to hide what's going on with my kids from me. If my child is coming to you and wants some kind of medical procedure or is talking about gender confusion or mental health issues, you're going to tell me, the parent. So that was kind of the backdrop for 2081. It went to the legislature. They adopted it and signed it into law, but subsequently have come back this year with Senate Bill 5181 and HB 1276. So two kind of, companion bills, if you will, that have moved through their chambers, both passed off the Senate and House. Now they've gone to the opposite chamber for consideration. So the hearing on Thursday was again over 1296. And TJ, there were at least a few dozen people signed in person to testify, many others to testify remotely. And by and large, they were there in opposition to the bill to say, leave 2181 in place. Don't gut the Parents' Bill of Rights. But the testimony certainly didn't reflect that. There were more people testifying or given the opportunity to testify by the chair, Senator Lisa Wellman, in support of the bill than those that were in opposition. So you had lots of rumblings. The hearing was a bit contentious and ended with a lot of people kind of throwing their hands up saying, why did I drive all the way here to testify and you don't even give me a chance?
So just to keep track of where we're at, the voters signed an initiative in the law in the legislature adopted it. And then it's turning around and trying to undermine it, as the critics would say. What exactly does the bill do, and how does that fundamentally undermine the initiative that was passed?
Right. Among the biggest changes in it, and Representative Monica Stonier is the sponsor, the prime sponsor of HB 1296. And she, in the hearing on Thursday, as she's said in other hearings on her bill, said this is about protecting student rights. So her bill is she contends more of a balance for student rights. And they say this aligns with federal protections for children. So that, let's say, and this example came up in testimony on Thursday, you got a student who's confused about their gender, or maybe because of social media feeding some of these questions about, am I a boy or a girl, or am I somewhere in the middle? What should I do? But they don't feel comfortable talking to their parents. The contention of the sponsor is that these kids need a safe place to go to school, whether it's a teacher they trust or the counselor at school, to go and say, these are my questions, and will you facilitate my further education of these issues? Parents are saying, wait a minute, if my kid is coming to you with something that's that big of a deal that they might subsequently start taking hormone blockers or talking to people about potential, gender altering surgeries and other procedures, I would want to know that as a parent. So that's been the argument of folks pushing back, saying this was the whole reason we put the Parents' Bill of Rights into place. And now the attempt here is to undo it. And the supporters of the bill say we need to protect students, and they contend you can balance that with parents' rights at the same time.
So why has this become such a high priority for the majority party in the state legislature? What are they arguing or making the case for this on terms of, why they need to pass this new law?
Well, that's a good question. I would argue, based on even some of the testimony I heard in the hearing on Thursday, that you've got the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction under Superintendent Chris Rakedahl asking for this legislation. And he sent a staff member to testify in support of the bill on Thursday. basically he says, we hope we don't have to enforce this, but written into the bill, it gives OSPI the authority to crack down on these school districts that fail to comply. Say they, a student went to a teacher or a counselor and said, I'm confused about my gender. Will you help me get some advice and don't tell my parents? And say it's a more conservative school district. And that school district said, well, we think your parents should probably know what's going on. In that case, OSPI could crack down on that teacher, that counselor, whatever, not certify them the next time they came up, and potentially, have other consequences against the school district for not complying if assuming 1296 or 5181 is signed into law. So OSPI has asked for this. They're the ones that told school districts, all 295 public school districts across the state, not to comply after it took effect, after 2081 took effect. So they're the ones who are asking for this and supporting it, along with the Washington Education Association, of course, a very powerful, student or state teachers lobby. So this fight is going to go, I can guarantee you, TJ, to probably the last couple of days of this session. This has been the ugliest thing, the most emotionally charged hearings I've sat in during the session. And it's only, I sense it only intensifying.
Meanwhile, how are the students doing academically?
Not great, right? I mean, you've reported on some of that, as have I, in the last couple of months when the latest national and state statistics came out. They're not doing well. They gauge them at, different measures at like kind of 4th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade. That seems to kind of be wherever the benchmarks are taken. And we're falling. We're falling in Washington state. I think it wasn't even that many years ago, TJ. I can't remember how many, but it seems like maybe just a couple of years before the pandemic, Washington state was held up as a model for some of our math and science scores for kids. Well, now we're middle of the pack, and in some cases far worse than that. And a lot of people, go ahead, ask.
So as I understand it, the K-12 education system that isn't able to achieve academic results for their students are saying that they can be trusted with kids' mental health and medical decisions without parental notice or awareness. So it seems like they should be achieving trust in terms of being able to have an academic outcome, which is their primary job. That seems like their primary job is to educate students, but they're fighting this battle over whether or not they can hide information from parents.
You're right. And that valid argument you just made is something I heard echoed over and over again by opponents of the bill, not just in the hearing on Thursday, but in prior hearings. Parents are saying you're not doing a great job educating our kids right now. And all this focus on social emotional learning, which of course popped up during the pandemic. Now you've got social and emotional, but there's really no learning going on. And they're injecting, opponents of the bill argue, many of these, issues about gender identity and, confusion and, ripping parents away from kids as far as those decisions go, injecting that into all the other things about reading, writing, arithmetic, right? And so I don't see this argument going away anytime soon. And I should note before we wrap up, President Trump, a couple days in office, or was it his first day? One of his first executive orders was, the Title IX stuff and only recognizing boys and girls as gender. That was brought up in the hearing Thursday by opponents of the bill. And then supporters said, no. There's not just one, there's not just two genders. We know there's any number of genders across the spectrum, and they claim that's science. So the argument about the science continues.
Well, it seems like the battle for one initiative is over, and the battle for and the second initiative is about to begin soon. So we'll have to keep an eye on this. Thanks, Caroline, for talking about it. Viewers can keep up on our work at thecentersquare.com. I'm your host, TJ Martinell, and thank you for listening to this episode of Washington in Focus.